Good morning, everybody. Ironica here for part 2 of my response video. Before I get started, I wanted to thank everyone who watched part 1. And if for some reason you're one of the people who has not seen it, I shall go ahead and link it in the description below. I would highly recommend you watch part 1 before you watch this. But for everyone else, let's go ahead and get started. But please know, even if you completely disagree with my points, I still greatly appreciate that you take time out of your day to watch the video. And please, leave a comment down saying what points I might have changed your mind on and what points you think I'm just being a complete idiot. I am open to all comments as long as we keep it family friendly, of course. So, without further ado, here is part 2 of my response video.
The boss fights of Dark Souls 2 are by far the worst in the series and of all From Software Soulsborne games, and it's not even remotely close. There are so many reused bosses and instances where things that aren't even boss material are given the title that Dark Souls 2 just downright lessens what it means to be called a boss in general. One of the first boss fights is fine for what it is in the form of the Last Giant. It's overly simplistic, and by the way, you'll see me use certain NPCs in my fights because I was doing their quest lines and you need to use them, but anyway, this fight was fine for what it is.
I am by no means one of the people who bashes others for summons. It is a mechanic in the game for people to use, so use it. The only time that anyone should criticize, in my opinion, is if you're doing a specific challenge run and you use summons to kind of bypass it unless they are completely immune to what your challenge is.
I don't have much to say besides, wait a second, hang on. Oh, he ripped his arm off. That's kind of like, there you go.
I do enjoy him showing how some of Elden Ring was inspired by Dark Souls 2. Even though I personally don't like Elden Ring myself, at least they took inspiration from all their other Soulsborne games.
Anyway, the further on we go, the quality of the boss encounters is nowhere near the same level as the original Dark Souls or any of the games that follow. For example, DS2 started having this weird obsession with giving swarms of enemies a health bar and calling it a boss.
Yeah, sure. No other bosses has one main boss with a bunch of mobs around them, right? This idea has never happened before Dark Souls 2 and has never happened since, right?
A good example of this would be the Skeleton Lords, which when you first enter, you see the 3 distinct lords and you think it's a 3v1 fight, but then you quickly realize that these guys die really fast. And then you get swarmed by hordes of skeletons, and every time you manage to cut one down, their deaths contribute to the Skeleton Lord boss fight health bar. And upon realizing that this isn't really a true boss fight, it diminishes any sense of achievement or strategy because you're just fighting a bunch of idiots in a room. But it has a health bar and you can't leave till they're all dead. Yeah, this is stupid.
So let me get this straight. Fighting 3 lords of the realm, having their servants join in when you cut them down, and having to kill the servants as well is stupid? There's actually strategy behind this fight, as unless you have a wide sweeping weapon, like say my favorite class of weapons, the halberds, you do not want to take down all 3 lords at the same time.
And yet this bizarre design decision keeps getting made because eventually once you go down the well in Majula, you end up fighting some rats, and then there's a fog door with a bonfire in front of it, which is weird because it's so close to the boss door, which is unlike anything else in the game. Why is this bonfire so close to the boss arena? Well, this has to be some insane fight where the developers thought we needed a bonfire so close to ensure we keep trying without being discouraged, right? Well, you enter and it's a room full of rats. That's it. That's the fight. It's just rats. Oh yeah, and one of those rats is the boss. Which one is it? No idea.
The boss is actually the one with the mohawk. As for why there's a bonfire next to the room, I personally do not know, but I can take a wild guess. There is a covenant on the opposite side. The covenant item to increase your loyalty to the covenant or your rank is a rat's tail. One of the ways to get that is by defeating this boss. So you can keep using bonfire aesthetics if you want to increase in that covenant. Also, this boss souls gives you the toxic mist spell. Pyromancy in this game really benefits from the poison mist and the toxic mist. So being able to easily get 4 or 5 toxic mist casting into your pool of spells is really beneficial.
Just keep swinging. Eventually, you'll hit a random rat and the boss's health bar will start chunking away. Now you just lock on to that one rat, ignore the rest, and slash at it till it dies, and that's it. That's the fight. Just rats. Why is this a boss fight? I genuinely can't understand how anyone at From Software looked at this and thought, yeah, this is great, people are gonna love this. Maybe they did just so they could say in interviews that they had tons of boss fights for people to enjoy, but eventually realized they couldn't meet that promise, and so shortcuts had to be made. Like a lot of shortcuts, an insane amount really. Like, dude, you thought this was bad? We're just getting started.
A reminder that a boss with a bunch of weak mobs around it is nothing new at all. Also note that there shall always be bosses that a lot of people won't like. Looking at you, Capra Demon. This is based on your personal preference. I shall go into more of a defense in a future video, but I do enjoy almost all the bosses in the game personally.
Because Dark Souls 2's boss variety is an astounding amount of quantity over quality in every measure. I mean, there's another boss fight where you enter this beautifully haunting arena and you're rushed by little disease rat dog things. Then a huge boss jumps down and it's just one of those rat dogs, but they blew it up to like 500 times its size. And then you just stay at its feet and attack and... hold on. Oh, so that's why this boss sucks in Bloodborne, because it's like this. Alright, anyway, yeah, this isn't a boss fight, guys. This is just a rat dog normal enemy, but now it's big. You'd think this is where this laziness ends, but my god, it gets worse.
A boss that has dogs in the arena and you need to focus on them first before the boss. Where have I seen that before? Anyways, animal bosses are not new. They didn't just blow up one of the toxic dogs, but made a new dog for you to fight. Some people do complain that this is just a weaker Sith. However, dogs has always been part of the FromSoft series, so making another one a large beast fight is not really that surprising. It has some different move sets, as well as a specific attack when the health is low.
Back in Hyde's Tower, you can enter the Fog Gate and you're greeted by a boss called Dragon Rider, which sounds a lot cooler than it is. You enter, and he's just a guy in armor.
What else did you expect a dragon rider to be besides human? A giant ant? Of course it was going to be a human.
Like barely any different than the big dudes you just fought before him. I guess the mechanic here is to not allow him to knock you off. Anyway, you just circle around and spank his cheeks until he turns to dust, and to make it even worse, later on in Drangleic Castle, after meeting Nishandra, the main villain of the game, you eventually are met with the Fog Gate. Remember that we're in Drangleic Castle. We just talked to the main baddie and there's a fog door. Oh man, this is such an important moment in the game. What horrors could lie ahead? And it's Dragon Rider again. Oh, sorry, 2 Dragon Riders now. The one up top has a bow and arrow. Are you serious right now? This is a pivotal moment in the game, and the best they could do is just put 2 of a boss we already fought? Oh my god, this is so bad. And the whole gimmick this time is we just fight the same Dragon Rider boss again, but now we gotta watch out for arrows. I think besides boss diversity being a major problem within Dark Souls 2,
boss diversity is actually not as big of an issue in Dark Souls 2 as he is making it out to be. The funny thing is, he just got finished bashing 3 very diverse bosses that are almost unique in themselves. I'll get to Magus when he does. And then complains about a semi-repeat boss right now. Good thing Dark Souls 1 never has any repeat bosses, right? Anyways, repeat bosses can be good when they either add an element to them or not make them that important to show how much you have grown as a character. In this fight, now you have to contend with not just a second one, but they give you a much larger arena to move around, and you can make the first one destroy the platform to bring the second one down. I do like the fact that the second one has less health, as he was supposed to be out of danger, so he wouldn't have much physical training as the first one. With that said, it is completely fine not to like this boss fight, but that is, again, your own personal preference to not like any type of repeat boss fights, while there are others like me who don't mind them when they add to the fight themselves.
The other major problem with all of these boss fights is that they lack one big crucial element, and that is the lack of spectacle. There are so many bosses in other FromSoft games, or just games in general, where bosses can be really easy to beat, but the spectacle makes up for it. Entering the arena only to be greeted by some magnificent beast, or the music swells and the boss's animations are articulate and amazing, that's what makes a good boss fight. But in Dark Souls 2, basically every single boss lacks that spectacle. You don't feel anything remotely extravagant or bewildering when you see Dragon Rider. You just walk in and there he is. Same goes for the rat bosses, there's nothing to be in awe of. Compare that to fighting bosses like Malekith in Elden Ring, or even Gaping Dragon in Dark Souls is like this incredible monster design. Like, you can see that thing and you're in complete awe of its presence. Or remember when you fought Seath in Dark Souls? Amazing. Or Manus, Ornstein, and Smo? So many great fights that combine not only complex game mechanics, but have great music and that crucial element of spectacle.
So much to cover here, but I shall try to keep it brief, as this is going to be a long video as is. He stated that, and I quote, "Basically every single boss lacks that spectacle." He said this after using the Pursuer's entrance and showcasing great spectacles, which is odd, as well as using mostly Elden Ring's clips. For the sake of this section, let us ignore all the games after Bloodborne, as those games were made after Dark Souls 2. Bloodborne, if you remember, was being made at the same time. Since I have not played Bloodborne, however, I can't speak to how many spectacles there were in that game. Thus, let's look at Dark Souls 1 and compare it to Dark Souls 2. Please note that for this section, I am just comparing how many of them have videos before you fight the boss, and I'm only looking at the base game and not the DLCs. In Dark Souls 1, you have 2 of the 4 lords, Nito and Seath. You have ONS, Gwendolyn, Centipede Demon, Quelaag, Gaping Dragon, Sif, the Gargoyles, and the master of them all, Pinwheel. That is 10 in Dark Souls 1's base game. For Dark Souls 2, you have all 4 Great Lords, Lost Sinner, the Rotten, Old Iron King, and Duke's Day Frida. You have the Last Giant, Pursuer, Executioner's Chariot, Felstag, Nashandra, and, though it's not a video, I would also include Aldia, as he does talk to you before the fight, and was building up to this through multiple interactions you had with him. Counting that, it is also 10. The reason why it doesn't seem as much is due to the percentage, not the flat number itself. All bosses don't really need a flashy cutscene in order to hype them up. Look at Taurus Demon in Dark Souls 1. No cutscene, no music, you enter the boss area and you see an empty runway. However, running halfway down the path, this huge demon lands right in front of you and would freak out new players. In Dark Souls 2, there are other bosses that has the same effect. You have the Looking Glass Knight's entire arena, Scorpioness Nashka, being mostly buried in the sand until you try to hit her. Vendrick, with finally meeting the king and seeing him as an empty husk, or having the somber music kick in, and others I could add to the list. Needing cutscenes or a huge pretty arena is purely a personal preference and not a genuine issue that the game has.
And for some reason, you can fight Ornstein in Dark Souls 2, but it's like his armor that came alive or something, and he's not called Ornstein, and it's super lame. It's just him alone in a cathedral, like, okay, why? It belittles the greatness that came before it. Thankfully, FromSoft would deliver spectacle-like fights in droves in future games, but man, Dark Souls 2 lacks it severely. There's like 3 fights I can really think of in DS2 that have any sort of spectacle when you enter it. The first would be the dragon fight in the giant cage. While the dragon is reused like a lot of the other things in DS2, at least the arena and how it looks has some sort of spectacle to it. And the other would be the final boss in the Sunken King DLC in the form of Sin. Seeing that dragon roar and its putrid breath erupt across the arena, that's cool as hell. The last fight I'll talk about later on in this section.
So, if we are including the DLCs and talking about what happens when you enter the arena instead of just cutscenes. Then for my previous list, I would add the Skeleton Lords, as seeing the 3 lords get up from their thrones and slowly float down was cool. The Demon of Song, as it is a big, beautiful arena, and finding out that the final voice you were hearing was from this frog was a nice surprise, especially considering the lore. And the Giant Lord. The entire memory leading up to him is a spectacle. Honestly, I'm surprised he didn't remember Looking Glass Knight, as that is one of the best boss arenas in Dark Souls 2 base game. Well, he does, but that's later in the video. For the DLC, I would add Elena, as her summoning her halberd while taunting you is a nice touch. And Sir alone, as not only is his arena beautiful, but he also bows to you if you bow to him. My guess is that he heard lots of negative stuff about the game and wanted to run through it to make his own video. I'm probably wrong about that, but that is just my perspective.
But I mean, even the final boss fight in the base game has little to no spectacle to it. Nashandra is just this slow boss that is more annoying than anything. First off, she's preceded by a duo fight against 2 pretty generic warriors who don't really do anything cool but try to overwhelm you. Then you face Nashandra, who besides her little curse mechanic, she just stands there basically and you wail on her. Comparing her to Gwyn in Dark Souls, at least he keeps you on your toes. And Gwyn doesn't even speak a single word, and yet his demeanor and situation speak volumes due to the environment design and how it all comes together.
I am completely confused by what he means by spectacle at this point. Earlier, he showed a bunch of cutscenes. Then he talks about how it looks when you enter the arena. And now he's talking about the fight itself. Which one is it? What is the actual definition of spectacle that is being used? I would love to talk about it, but it is hard to understand what he is referring to. Back to Nashandra. What is missing by most, heck, I even missed it for a long time until someone else pointed it out in another video, is that unlike all the other bosses where you walk through the fog wall, she is the one who walks through. That cutscene is basically telling you that you are the boss in the fight. That knowledge makes this fight better to me, knowing that roles were reversed for this fight.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, in the Sunken DLC, you can face off against Alana, who's this monster queen, but wait a second, oh my god, it's just Nashandra again. Like, it's literally almost the same character model and everything.
Considering that they are both daughters of Manus, of course they shall look similar. However, it is really a completely different boss fight. You can't rightfully compare the two just because they are abyss women that uses a long weapon and uses magic. That's like comparing the second phase of ONS to Nito, as they both have a big weapon and have a PB AoE attack.
The only difference here is that Alana can summon skeletons to help her, which is stupid, and to add to her laziness, if you don't burn her down fast enough, she summons another boss from the base game to help her out.
She has a summoning pool that she chooses from each summon. If you do not defeat whatever she summoned, it removes it from the pool. She shall summon one of the other two. It isn't based off of health, as I have gotten the simp first on some of my attempts.
But thankfully I killed her fast enough to not have to deal with that. But that's so lazy. Not to mention, this is the first DLC that was released, so players who played it when it came out would have just fought Nashandra. So Alana was an even bigger slap in the face back then too. Like, I get it, Alana is supposed to be a fragment of Manus like Nashandra, but come on, man. She's literally the same boss fight. That's so boring.
He knew the lore, yet he stuck with the false notion that it was the same fight. I just don't get how you can see them as the same fight. What's funny is that in his Dark Souls 3 video, he praises Champion Gundyr, even though it is a direct copy of Lungda's Gundyr, with more aggression and an extra move or two. He does admit that it is a copy and just calls it an upgrade. He praises that fight, yet puts down Elena, who has almost completely different movesets because the models look similar. Anyways, I better stop and focus on the point of the video before I go off on a tangent. Elena is not the same fight as Nashandra.
Then you have boss fights that are just copy and paste normal enemies, like the Ruin Sentinels fight, which is just 3 Ruin Sentinels that you can face later on in Drangleia Castle. And yes, I know Dark Souls had bosses like Taurus and Capra Demon later on as normal enemies too. That's lazy as well.
The Rune Sentinels are the best multi-boss format. You start with one of them on a small ledge. You fight only that one. The small ledge makes it so you can't just run and snipe it. You are forced to learn the move set that it has. Then, once you defeat the first one, the other 2 come at you. You can either fight them on the small ledge or fall down to the large room. Since you already have practiced with the first one, you have learned their timings and thus mainly just need to focus on the openings. Then, just to shake things up, they have one additional move you have not yet seen to keep you on your toes. That, my friend, is good game design.
And then if you're playing the updated version of DS2, the true final boss is now Aldia. And he's also a mess. Especially if you're a melee-based character, his fire does ridiculous amounts of damage as soon as you get close to him, making his boss fight less of a satisfying conclusion to your quest, and more of an annoyance than anything. I ended up respecking my guy in New Game Plus to have some magic, just so I wouldn't have to deal with stuff like Aldia's constant fire damage in subsequent playthroughs because it's not balanced for melee-only builds.
Timing, Endymion, timing. I just beat him with my halberd-focused character, so I know the pain of his fire. However, knowing when you can attack and when to leave him be is part of the fight. To complain about this one aspect that hurts melee builds, when in actuality it hurts all builds as his defense is insane when the fire is going, is like me complaining about Sir Alone or Bert's Ivory King because they won't give me the space to use my bow only attacks without being hit. I had to learn to basically hug them and wait for those opportunities to attack instead of trying the standard method of creating distance before attacking. Same with Aldia and melee users. You just have to learn when it is safe to attack and when to back away.
One of the biggest missed opportunities is King Vendrick, who's reduced to a shell of himself in the Undead Crypt. If I could change any fight in this game, it would have been making Vendrick the final boss. Having Vendrick completely controlled by Nashandra being the final obstacle would have been much more interesting than what we got. Having his weakened form be possessed by the spirit of Nashandra and having Vendrick rise up and become a mix of both his original powerful self along with the power of the Shard of Manus would have made for a much more memorable fight than what we got, which is a Hollow King in his underwear swinging his sword a little.
Though it might sound cool, it would go against the entire lore, theme, and reveal of King Vendrick. The fight itself is not supposed to be a spectacle, but more of a mercy kill. He has gone completely hollow, never finding the solution to the curse, discovering what Nashandra truly was, and preventing her from taking the throne. He even went so far as to remove his own soul, locked it behind a door that you could only open if you're human, and, knowing that he was hollowing, secluded himself deep in the crypt. Could it have been improved some? Sure, but a possessed king would not work with what the story was trying to say.
This video has been pretty negative about the wrongs of Dark Souls 2, so I'd like to point out some fights I actually think are pretty good. Firstly is the Mirror Knight fight. This fight has the spectacle point down pretty well with the impressive thunderstorm and rain effects, along with the Mirror Knight facing you with its impressive reflective surfaces. I wish more fights had this level of detail and build-up, and if anything, Mirror Knight, in my opinion, should have been the fight we had after meeting Nashandra, not 2 Dragon Riders.
Twin Dragon Riders is probably my least favorite boss in the entire game, so I do agree with his opinion. I also do agree that Mirror Knight would have been a much better boss fight right after you meet the Queen.
And although being pretty basic, the Lost Sinner is at least a fight that keeps you somewhat on your toes. Amidst the 4 primal bonfire fights, Sinner is the only one I look forward to facing again. Duke's dear Freya is just a big damage sponge surrounded by spiders, which is fine, but it shows that the actual difficulty of that fight doesn't come from the boss. Although the lead up to that fight is, hang on, oh, so that's why this room feels so familiar to me. Anyway, The Rodent is kinda decent, I like the macabre look to it, and I did die twice facing it this run, once because it grabbed me, and then just did hilariously high damage, and the other time I rolled into flames and turned into ash, which is, my bad. And I want to shout out to Fume Knight from the second DLC. Fume Knight hits hard and it can regenerate its health based on its proximity to the fire idols outside the boss arena. You can get rid of these idols if you have the items required, and since I only had enough for half of the arena at the time, I had to make sure to focus Fume Knight into facing me on the side where the idols were gone to ensure it couldn't heal itself. It became this fight of not only facing a worthy adversary capable of killing me quite quickly, but it was a fight that tested my ability of situational awareness. And that's why Fume Knight is a great fight, all things considered.
'Tis nice to hear some praises for some of the bosses. And yes, I too noticed that he talks about things that heal Fume Knight, but also casting warmth right by him.
There's also just some other lame boss fights like the Covetous Demon. It's just this big chubby Jabba the Hutt looking dude who rolls every once in a while. There's not much really to say about it, only that it also shows up randomly in the Ivory King DLC too. There's also Mytha, who's basically Medusa, and besides the whole burning the windmill to stop the poison thing, she lacks spectacle or any semblance of cool factor. I guess one fight that's a little cool is the Demon of Song, because it looks like an old lady wrapped in a foreskin frog thing, or maybe it's an eye, I don't know. Regardless, I like the lore surrounding this one, even if the fight is kind of mindless, which is a reoccurring theme if you haven't figured that out yet.
I'm gonna just skip breaking down each boss he mentioned, as this is not what this video is about, and it's already getting long.
But before talking about my favorite boss in DS2, I want to first talk about my least favorite boss, and that would be Aged Smelter Demon. This fight is Fume Knight, but if everything about that fight sucked complete Firstly, Smelter hurts you quite a bit and can heal itself, which I don't like as a mechanic, no matter the circumstances.
Before anyone says anything, there were comments telling him why the boss was healing, so in his Dark Souls 3 recap, he did retract that point.
And Smelter can hurt you simply by you being near it, which, like Aldia, is a BS mechanic that only seems to exclusively punish players who are melee only.
Here's another personal preference that he has. He focuses on a boss that uses the emulation spell as part of the boss, since, he is basically a living magic fire. Wouldn't you expect, if you get close to a fire, to take fire damage? As for it hurting melee users, I actually do enjoy when games have bosses that makes a certain build weaker against them, but not immune to it. It makes you think of a different solution than the ones you are used to from all the other bosses. Both Smelter Demons and Aldia hurts melee players who always hug bosses, while bosses like the Burnt Ivory King and Sir Alone hurts those of us who always try to stay out of weapon range in order to attack with either spells or with archery.
And when you design boss fights to punish players for choosing a certain way to play and not other play styles, then you know it's not a good boss design. The normal Smelter Demon in Iron Keep isn't bad, it has all the same mechanics as the aged version, but the reason why I'm fine with the original is that the damage output just isn't as high. Aged Smelter Demon is just absurd, and adding that the damage it does so consistently and it being bigger in size means its swings cover more space too. It just sucks. Anyways, enough about bad bosses for right now.
And he is in a co-op area. And he is a very late game boss. And his arena is larger. All these things make his fight to the same level as the first one for late game players. Think of it as an adjusted boss inflation. Now he is going to talk about his favorite boss in the entire game, as well as my favorite boss too. So let's just sit back and enjoy his enthusiasm for this wonderful game.
Let's talk about my favorite boss fight in the game. And to do so, let's go back to my favorite DLC in this game and to the land of Elon Lois, which I am for sure pronouncing wrong again. The final encounter of this DLC has you facing off against a boss that combines a lot of the BS mechanics that Dark Souls 2 has, but does it without being annoying due to the reasons I will explain now. In this fight, firstly, you encounter and drop down, and then you enter an amazing battle arena, arguably one of the coolest in the series in my opinion. The old chaos swirling around you with these gigantic portals is such a cool look. Then the portals open and these charred knights start emerging Avengers Endgame style to kill your ass. This fight is cool because if you free all the loyal knights, they join you in the battle to face their corrupted brethren. It then becomes this all-out brawl where you're rushing in with the loyal knights to fight their king and brethren, and it's so freaking cool. The knights have their own mechanics and spells, and you're all fighting and fending off these corrupted knights as they keep emerging from the portals. Eventually, the portals just keep pumping out enemies, and in an act of self-sacrifice, the royal knights you freed start sacrificing themselves to freeze each portal shut so no more reinforcements can emerge. So in a way, as the fight persists, both sides are losing, which is wicked. Then comes the actual boss, the burnt Ivory King himself, emerging from the central portal. Now the fight becomes a battle to the death between you and the king to see whether the old chaos consumes the world. And the Ivory King is fast, he's strong, and his attacks look wicked. The spectacle is at its best right now, the music is swelling, the environment is jaw-dropping. This, my friends, is a real cinematic boss fight. Not rats, not slow mages or stupid skeleton lords. This is a fight worth fighting. And eventually it comes down to all the knights you had at your side dying valiantly to seal the portals, and you have to make it count and take out this king. And it's not a complicated or damage-intensive fight either, it's just great. Of course, you could not save the knights and face a horde of corrupted dudes plus Ivory King, and that sounds like a nightmare I don't want to experience. But this delicate balance of sealing portals and losing comrades is really cool. And it's great because you make the fight more in your favor, not by leveling up more or changing your build. You turn the tide by actively exploring the Loy's capital and freeing these knights, which leads to new discoveries and encounters. Like, it just rewards your exploration, and that's awesome. We needed more of that in DS2, in all games really. But eventually you cut down the Ivory King and you halt the crawling chaos. The land is saved, and you eventually learn that this kingdom too, like Drangleic, was in a similar position where a Shard of Manus was with the king as well. But the situation is different. This Shard of Manus wants to save the land rather than destroy it like in Drangleic, and that's awesome. That's a fun twist. Man, the Ivory King fight and this whole DLC minus the BS optional snowfield is what I want out of Dark Souls. It's so great. So while Dark Souls 2 gets a lot of boss fights really wrong, sometimes absurdly wrong, I will say that the Ivory King is by far the best fight in the entire game, and it's not even close. I really wish the original final boss was more like this Ivory King fight, but instead you just get Nishandra and Aldia in a great dull room. Well, it is what it is, and now for the finale.
I am a huge defender of Dark Souls 2. Most of this video is defending the game, in fact. However, I do admit that the final boss gauntlet is the weakest in the series. Now, it is just my opinion, but it is something that I shall address in a later video.
Ultimately, although I have a lot of problems with Dark Souls 2 from its questionable level placement design and its less than stellar boss lineup, I still really enjoy the game. When I say Dark Souls 2 is the worst Soulsborne game From Software has ever made, we have to also realize that what I consider the worst FromSoft game is still better than like 90% of the games available today. So it may be disappointing and uneven by From Software standards, but by basically every other gaming company's standards, it's still a great game in comparison. I mean, it reviewed remarkably well, it sold good too.
I hope everyone understands that. Lots of times, I've heard people hate on the game just because of their own preferences, but then turns around and bash anyone who says they like it. Even if you don't like the game, don't look down on those who do. We all have our own taste and preferences in video games, so there really isn't a reason to hate those who might enjoy games that you might not like.
And I think the realization I had more than anything is that Dark Souls 2 represents what could happen to the Soulsborne games when its creator isn't at the helm. Of course, Miyazaki would return for Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring as director, each game a masterpiece in their own way. And games I want to explore, like I have this one at some point maybe, but Dark Souls 2, while not as good as the others, had its own strengths too. There's goofy fights for sure, like being able to cheese the pursuer with the ballista, but it adds charm to the game, and there's again the really great addition of Majula as your hub town, which I love, ankle biters included. Not to mention cool moments like the dragon statue trying to eat you, like look at this is so cool. Or the use of fire as a gameplay mechanic that I wish From Software did more with. And the feeling of the second half of the game with its Abyss Walker aesthetic it had going on. Not to mention the absolute metric F-ton of weapons and equipment in the game too. It's good stuff. So if you take anything from this video, it's that I don't hate Dark Souls 2 at all. I love it for all the blemishes and problems because ultimately it's still a really enjoyable and rewarding game to play, and especially eye-opening in a post-Elden Ring environment. There's tons of clever nods that get replicated in future games, and even fun hints at games to come in the imminent future that I found clever. It's a good game. It's not my favorite, but I still enjoyed it. I just need to get to New Game Plus Plus so I can buy all the spells I'm missing so I can get my Platinum Trophy, but even in New Game Plus right now, I'm enjoying myself. It's been years since I've played Dark Souls 2, but I'm glad I did so that I could not only make this video and share it with you all, but to give me insight into design decisions from future releases as well, and appreciating them more. So whether it's your first time playing or your 10th, if you were looking for a sign to dive into the abyss one more time, to visit Majula and listen to the waves, or playing the most polarizing release in From Software's Soulsborne series, this is it. Play Dark Souls 2. Just remember, a lot of the bosses are and the level design doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they misuse Vendrick, but it's still a fun game, mistakes and all. But I still look at this game in fond memory. The epic highs and the disappointing lows. It all comes together to make an experience I'll remember. From the weird grandmas to the fragmented level design and the blacksmith who hates you whenever you talk to him, Dark Souls 2 is, at its heart, an experience I'll cherish for years to come. And really, if Dark Souls 2 is anything, it's to enjoy the ride for the journey instead of the destination.
On that note, I want to thank you for watching this little response video of mine. This is the first time I poured this much time and effort into a video, so I hope that you at least enjoyed it and possibly made you think a little. For those of us still here, I am in the middle of my next scripted video where I go through all the bosses in Dark Souls 2 and bring up anything that could improve them, so you don't want to miss that. But for now, in case I don't see you again, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.